Welcome, everyone, and hello. My name is Makeda Mahadeo, and I'm a content creator, a presenter, and DJ based here in Kigali, Rwanda. I'm from now 2 Commonwealth member states, Jamaica and Rwanda, so I'm not only happy to be here with you today, I'm quite invested in these discussions. 10 years ago, almost to this day, the Commonwealth Charter was signed. The Charter was developed and agreed on by Commonwealth member states, and it outlines the Commonwealth's fundamental principles, values, and commitment to democracy and the rule of law, human rights, international peace and security, sustainable development, protecting the environment, the importance of young people, and the role of civil society, among others. The idea of the Charter, a single document that would enshrine the Commonwealth's values, originated from the recommendations of the Eminent Persons Group in their landmark report published in 2011. That was 11 years ago. That report, called A Commonwealth of the People, Time for Urgent Reform, was an important milestone for the modernization of the Commonwealth. Its recommendations aimed at establishing how the Commonwealth could remain a symbol of international cooperation and significance. 10 years to today, the anniversary of the signing of the Commonwealth Charter is an opportunity to pause and take stock of the progress of the Commonwealth that it's made since it was established. But more importantly, it provides an important opportunity for the people of the Commonwealth, mentioned in the opening words of the Charter, we the people, to come together to exchange ideas, draw on collective insights, and speak frankly and openly about the challenges that lie ahead. So to kickstart this conversation during the run-up to the 2022 Commonwealth People Forum here in Rwanda last year, the foundation asked civil society to comment on the Charter. These slides coming up show some of their ideas and thoughts. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of them now. Yes, maybe we should also include a commitment to protecting the human rights of all people in the Commonwealth, especially those citizens who face multiple vulnerabilities. Okay. Can we expand or define what promoting health and well-being means? Experience has taught us that promoting health and well-being alone can be interpreted vaguely. And while we're looking at these, I also want everyone on the call to kind of just be thinking about what your thoughts are on it. We want to hear your comments. We want to know what your thoughts are, how you feel. Throughout this conversation, we want you to be having your voice heard. Yes, inclusion of policy statement on Indigenous knowledge, utilization in sustainable development, environmental sustainability, and health development projects. It's a great reservoir of knowledge, absolutely. Yes, so over the next 90 minutes, we are looking forward to hearing lots more thoughts and opinions about the Charter from our amazing panelists, but also from you in the audience. Thank you to all of you that have joined the live. We have had over 4,000 registrations to attend. So I think we'll be seeing some people coming in and out and building up. So this is sure to be a vibrant and hopefully a balanced and insightful session. Now, before we get into the thick of it, I am going to ask all of you in the audience to make sure that your name on your Zoom ID clearly identifies you, so that when we come to the question and answer section in the final third of the event, we can correctly identify you. And now that that's out of the way, I would like to introduce our first 3 contributors. And as I introduce you, I will ask you to go ahead and turn on your video. So our first speaker is an elected councillor of the Belize City Council. He is the youngest elected official and currently the deputy mayor. He's also the Commonwealth Youth for Sustainable Urbanization Network. Welcome to the chat, Mr. Allan Pollard. Go ahead and turn your camera on. And our next contributor is the co-founder of Youth for Change Global and was awarded the Queen's Young Leader Award for his services to bettering the lives of young people. Please also welcome Mr. Harry Phinda. I'm excited to have you both on the chat, and I'm excited to hear what it is that you have to say. Harry, when you get the chance, go ahead and turn on your video. Via pre-recording, we will also hear from Dr. Maisha Reza, who was chair of the Commonwealth Students Association in 2018. She's an associate fellow of the Royal Commonwealth Society and a member of the Commonwealth Youth Gender Equality Network. She is currently a lecturer in biomedical sciences at the University of Exeter. In section 2 of this event, we will be hearing from 4 more amazing changemakers and young leaders. But for now, let's go ahead and get started so we can hear from the 2 brilliant minds that we have with us right now. This first section of our conversation, we will be reflecting on the relevance and importance of the Charter 10 years later. So I'll pose my questions to both of you as we do want to hear your insights, but I do want you to feel free if something comes up that you want to voice. Let's go ahead and keep the dialogue open, and that's going to be throughout the conversation. All right. So Allan, let's go ahead and start with you. And I want you both to kind of think about this. And Harry, I see you laughing, but I'm coming to you too. Let's go ahead and think about how familiar you are with the Charter, and what do you think about the document?
Morning. Thanks for having me. Greetings to everybody who's signed in and watching us. I think that's very important to start with, that people are actually involved now into the conversation. I think that is one of the key things that we have to push going forward as the Commonwealth. I am currently involved in the Commonwealth Youth for Sustainable Urbanization, which is a new network launched last year in Rwanda. So I'm kind of would say new to the Commonwealth family, but at the same time, you know, that kind of made me not fully aware of what the Charter was until after really being involved, listening to some of the peers who have experienced in the Commonwealth family, you know, and just being at Rwanda and my first CHOGM I got an inside look of, you know, what we really do here at the Commonwealth on a broader scope, right? And the Charter really encompasses that broader scope that we talk about, because there are many networks which a lot of people focus on, of course, the youth networks, so which I'm a part of. And, you know, so for me, it's like something new. And at the same time, as I go into the Commonwealth more, as I sit in these programs, and I get kind of new information as I go along, all right? But I knew that in every group, you know, you have to have, in any organization, you have to have policies that, you know, embodies core values of why you're here in the first place, right? You know, and I believe that, you know, this document is a good framing document for that, for the Commonwealth, for all these groups, all right? Areas which I am most familiar with are areas of democracy, being that I'm a young politician, good governance, sustainable development, because I'm a part of the Sustainable Urbanization Network. And of course, as a youth, the importance of young people within the Commonwealth, you know? So that to me is essential, that you have some sort of framework that embodies that, you know, that kind of guides whatever policy we have going forward.
Right. Harry, what do you think the Charter says about the Commonwealth? And you can just start off with saying, you know, how familiar you are with the Charter as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I just want to check everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Amazing. Great. So I think it's quite interesting, you know, when I got asked this question, especially as someone who, so I, just for background, I was born in Zimbabwe, grew up in South Africa, and came to the UK when I was 12. So I've got a sort of broad view of the sort of Commonwealth, particularly from the African and the sort of UK side. And actually, growing up in the UK, we had no idea generally what the Commonwealth was, or let alone what the charter was. And so I think it's quite interesting. I understand why perhaps, there hasn't been that much UK involvement in the sort of Commonwealth quite broadly. But I think that's a real issue, if I'm honest with you. I think considering, the first time I actually got involved or understood what the charter was when I was awarded the Queen's Young Leader Award in 2018. And that whole program was based on this idea of showing and showcasing some of the amazing talent across the Commonwealth. And one thing that I really had a massive experience of during that period is just how engaged other countries are in the Commonwealth, and actually how completely disengaged the UK is, particularly in it. And so, I know we're going to come on to sort of some issues later on, but I think just the fact that my first interaction was when I was 25 years old of first of all the Commonwealth Charter, but also the Commonwealth, and the importance of it in this massive wide network is a real issue. I think I'm definitely not one of those people who think we should completely abolish it and completely remove it. However, what I do think is, we really need to look at where the ownership lies for things like this, and how it's owned by the people who most benefit from it. And so, even if I speak from a Zimbabwean perspective, the Zimbabwe currently is, looking to come back into the Commonwealth because there is a clear benefit in being part of this. And so, really, for me, it's how, moving forward, how do we make sure that whilst there are beneficiaries to the sort of being part of this group and being part of the charter, which I think, on broad terms, many people would accept, all of the things that it's trying to achieve. I think my issue is, how do we measure that? So how do we measure its impact? And so I think that's been one thing which has been quite missing, which is, okay, great, how do we measure the impact of the Commonwealth Charter? But then secondly, how do we make sure that people, and how do we make sure it's owned by the right to sort of right institutions, and making sure that actually those countries and those states which most need help in this particular area are going to benefit from it. And so really, I think the charter is great aspirationally, but I think for me it's because for me I don't think there'd be anyone who disagree with the principles. For me it's about okay, great, how do we make them measurable, and how do we measure its impact across the Commonwealth?
Yes, and I think that is some, we are going to get into a bit of that as we move along. I mean, this section we're talking about the relevance, but we do want to talk about, how to put the values into action. That's why we're here today. And, we also will be getting into raising awareness, because it is true what you said, you had no idea about the charter. And I think a lot of people probably feel the same way. So we're going to go into a bit more of that a bit later. But I do want to first get you guys' insight on how you think, or has the charter, I mean, I think I already gleaned a bit of the answer from what you just said, but can you think of any examples where using the charter has made or might have made a difference, or could have made a difference?
Yeah, I can go first on that. So I think one of the ways for me that I've seen it very positively have an influence is the importance of young people. I think that really has shone through, whether that's all of the networks that the Commonwealth has been able to build across the spectrum. I do think, again, I'd point that the UK sort of involvement in that is very minimal. But I think generally the fact that these massive networks, the fact that you have a huge amount of young people who are really engaged in sort of a lot of issues which really affect them, I think is great. And the fact that we're actually able to cross-pollinate some of the information is really, really key. And obviously the Queen's Young Leader Program or Award was birthed out of, so it started in 2012, and it was birthed out of the sort of charter and the importance of the young people. And I know even that program, particularly for my colleagues in other Commonwealth countries, has had a massive impact. And so I would probably say, if I was putting money on it, I'd probably say the youth element is probably where the charter has had the most influence. And obviously, what's unfortunate is obviously all the other elements of it are also impacted by young people. The most impacted are oftentimes young people.
The young people, right?
Exactly. And so it has to be foundational. So the youth element is foundational. I think that's great, but we have to have in other areas.
Absolutely. I do want to hear from Allan before we hear from our video contributor. Allan, what do you think? When do you think that this charter could have made a difference? Very briefly, if you can.
Yeah, I'm glad that me and Harry are betting alike. I would put my money on the youth, of course, too. I've been here in London for over a week. I'm from Belize, and I'm at the Youth Leaders Summit, and I'm sitting in each session from different organizations within the Commonwealth. And this gave me the opportunity to learn what other youths are doing in different member countries, right? So from human rights to working with people of disability, these have all been executed, with principles of the Charter at the core, for in democracy, for example, we had a session on elections and how Commonwealth bodies oversee elections and also advocate for fair electoral processes, and this really resonated with me because, I know how this can be like a huge barrier of entry for young people who aspire to participate in electoral politics within their countries. I had personally the opportunity to run for parliament back home, and there were irregularities that affected my turnout, which all stems from incumbency and having the comfort of knowing that these Commonwealth institutions are aiding in that is a real life example to me of how we're getting somewhere. For example, the local government forum, which I work closely with as a municipal leader, they have worked closely with the Belize City Council through CARILED, the Caribbean Local Economic Development, and we have strengthened our local economic development department, who are tasked with MSMEs in Belize City. And at a time during the pandemic where, the economy was completely slowed down, a lot of people were able to provide for their families and have good quality of life, through one of the toughest times in our history. And I believe that's a real world example of how, Commonwealth organizations, through the work of the Charter,
So there's some promise here. There's definitely something that we can work with for the rest of this conversation. We do want to hear from our third contributor, Dr. Maisha. We asked her, to what extent is the Charter reflective of Commonwealth citizens' aspirations, and how well does the Charter reflect the ideas and ideals of young people for a better world? So let's go ahead and hear what she has to say. Panelists, please turn your cameras and your microphones off for this video.
The youth that the Commonwealth engage with are already passionate advocates for change who are looking for opportunities to develop themselves and make an impact within their communities. If we were to look internally within the structure of the Commonwealth, are young people leading youth-related policies and leading youth engagements? Are their time and effort still valued, or are we treating the work and service of young people as training and gaining experience? As we speak about the importance of having young people at decision-making tables, something that I've personally advocated for, is the Commonwealth really embedding young people as leaders, or are we consulting them while gatekeeping paid leadership roles? Now, on the impact level, if you're going to go on the ground and ask young people who are vulnerable, young people who are unemployed due to mismatched skills, young people who are resorting to various means to survive because they're unable to find decent work, young people whose lives are devastated due to the climate crisis, or those who don't have basic necessities, do they know about the Commonwealth or the Commonwealth Charter? Its emphasis on the youth and how they are the present and future of the Commonwealth? So I don't think the Charter is really being translated as well as it could and make the impact it has potential for. Last year during BBC World Questions, so many young people interviewed across Commonwealth regions said that they did not understand the value or the relevance of the Commonwealth as an organization because they don't feel engaged, or some even said they had no idea what the organization was about other than the element of British colonies binding us together. And as the Charter clearly states, creation of opportunities for these individuals is important. Every country has unique challenges, and the Charter has to be relevant to people across cultures, backgrounds, age, and language. Is how can we ensure that the Charter is something that is easily translated into tangible actions that general youth population on the ground can understand, can engage with, and feel empowered to uphold? I think these are big hurdles we need to reflect on with honesty and think about how to challenge some of the still archaic structures that uphold the institution. It is important for us to work quickly and utilize this Year of the Youth so that we can maintain the relevance of the Commonwealth to young people at large and not just motivated, proactive youth leaders. We must focus on embedding the voices of those whose voices are hardly ever heard, sometimes even tokenized, but are most important to be at the forefront.
I do want to hear, what are your thoughts on not only the question, but on what she said? Let's go ahead and start with Allan. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she said a mouthful, especially on the part of having the charter being translated, to young people, and just raising that awareness around what it is in the first instance. We can get into what it encompasses and embodies and all of that later, but just the importance of what the charter is, being able to have these people within the Commonwealth understand that, listen, we're not just a group of people that's coming together, but we're also coming together with one shared goal, one shared vision, or one shared set of principles that hold us together. And I think that is important to be able to translate that to common people within the Commonwealth, because it's not only people who are, for me, interested in politics or interested in public policy or diplomacy, but everyday people who the policy affects the most. And these are the students, these are the youths, these are people, athletes, everyday people who live with the effects of early impacts of these policies that are being implemented throughout the Commonwealth.
Right. Harry, do you agree with what she said?
To a certain extent. I'd probably say, as being, so obviously I ran Youth for Change, and Youth for Change's whole purpose was to get young people to write policy on issues that affect them. And so whenever I sort of have a think about, okay, great, how is this impacting the lives of, the Commonwealth citizens, and, and what are the measurable impacts? I'll go back to that. But I think generally, one of the things I think that's really missing is the capacity building on how you translate someone who, because obviously we can translate the charter for people to understand it more. I completely get that. I think we have to go a step further to say, how do they hold their government account to say, this is what the Commonwealth Charter says, and this is currently my experience as a Commonwealth citizen. And clearly there is a gap between those things. And so for me, it's about access, but it's really about what, how do we, because, if our goal is that absolutely everyone knows what the Commonwealth Charter is, if I'm honest with you, that doesn't change much. It doesn't change people's lives as much. What changes people's lives is the capacity and the ability to be able to use that information to actually change the outlook of their lives. And I completely agree with Allan to say that it's not about, just the people who are in public policy like myself and Allan. It's for everyday citizens. It's for everyday people to be able to have something in their hand that says, okay, great, I'm going to use this to hold people to account. And so I think awareness is a first step, but I'm always wary about sort of the awareness being the goal. For me, the goal is, how do I use this to transform my life?
Exactly.
Right. So it's awareness, but it's also engagement, right? It's trying to get, it's one thing, like you said, if people know that the charter exists, but I think the engaging part comes in when it's making people relate to it. They think that if they know about it, they can do something with it.
Exactly.
And of course, both of you, as you said, you're in policy, you're in politics, but do you think, when you put on the hat of someone who isn't, what do you think about it? What do you think that you would feel about it had you heard about this charter, about this organization, if you weren't in the spaces that you were in? Very briefly, Allan, what do you think?
That's a very good question. And a quite challenging one, if you'd ask me, because like you said, a lot of the awareness for me comes from being involved in the Commonwealth, right? Not even just politics, right? Before, I was in politics since 2018. I got elected at 24 years old, all right? But I haven't been engaged within the Commonwealth until like a year ago, over a year ago. So for me, even though I was in politics, even though I was in that space, it still didn't resonate with me yet. It still wasn't something that our governments had, made us aware of, or in school, in college, I wasn't even, this hasn't been touched at all. So it's kind of a bit of a gray area. So I could imagine if that is me in politics and not having that level of awareness, imagine the everyday person, and it goes back to the simple translating it, right? And I don't think it's a hard task, just it starts with identifying who we are as a body, and then what do we stand on? And that's the message that we're supposed to be pushing to every single citizen.
Right. Well, I think that's a great foundation for us to go ahead and move on to our next section of the conversation, where we're actually going to be reflecting on the Charter in practice, from aspiration to reality. So to start this section of our conversation, we will play video highlights from previous critical conversations in 2021 and in 2022. We asked leaders and experts across the Commonwealth for their views on the relevance of the Charter and its importance to the future of the Commonwealth. So let's go ahead and hear what they had to say.
If the Commonwealth is not founded on values which we, the people, can embrace and see as ideals for the future, even if we don't always accomplish them, then it really doesn't have a big future. And that was the importance of getting the Commonwealth Charter.
It gives us a framework to sort of organize ourselves with. These are also common ideas and concepts and ideologies that seem to be the thread holding the Commonwealth together.
Democracy, human rights, international peace and security, freedom of information, tolerance and understanding, the separation of powers in our governmental structures, and gender, younger people.
The Commonwealth Charter is an important tool because it has diplomacy, justice, the recognition of vulnerable state, the least developed country, small island, the young people. So technically it should be a guiding tool to allow us to speak the truth.
The Charter has no teeth, so what use is strengthening the language in a Charter if governments and countries can go off and do what they want anyway?
If we have all signed on as member states to protect and defend certain ideals, certain core values, and those are being violated, and no one is being held accountable for this, it's a big issue.
Can we translate all of this into concrete action that addresses the social injustice and inequalities that we are witnessing today?
Issues of gender are still very binary. Issues of the environment aren't as pronounced as they need to be, given all the realities that we're dealing with today.
The issue that I see with the Charter as it is now is that it's ideas. So you'll see that in all of those sections, I think it's 16 core values and principles. They all start with, we recognize that, we commit to, we believe in. And my question is, so what? We recognize these things. What are we going to do about them?
I'd invite you all to look at what our Charter starts with. It doesn't say we the governments. It says we the people. The people.
So I'm sure many of us, as we were watching that, we were agreeing with a lot of what was said. We were nodding our heads. So to go ahead and discuss this topic further, I'd like to go and introduce our speakers. As I introduce you, please turn on your cameras. Allan and Harry, you can already go ahead since we've met you already. Next up, we have the founder and managing director of the Breadfruit Collective, a gender and environmental justice civil society organization in Guyana. Welcome, Christine Samwaroo. You can go ahead and turn on your camera. Yes, thank you for joining us. And Harry, we want you to go ahead and turn your camera back on as well. Our next contributor is a PhD student in history at Queen Mary University of London. She is also the host of the weekly podcast, The History Hotline, that discusses events and individuals that have shaped Black history in Britain. There's a lot of content there. Welcome to the chat, Deanna Lyncook. Next, we have the founder of Future Ancestors Services, an Indigenous and Black-owned youth-led social enterprise that advances climate justice, anti-racism, and ancestral accountability. Oof, a tall order there, but so necessary. Welcome to Larissa Crawford. And finally, our last speaker to join us, an award-winning Delhi-based writer and poet of Bengali origin. They write and report on themes of gender, disability rights, climate, and culture. Welcome, Riddhi Dastidar. So a quick note, welcome, Riddhi. A quick note for you in the audience. We will be coming to you next to get your views. So please have a look in the chat for the question prompts, and we'll be asking you in the next section to hear about it. That's in about 20 minutes time, all right? So just a reminder for everyone in the audience there. So we all saw the video that ran before I introduced the panel. I want to get some of your thoughts on what was said. So Larissa, do you want to go ahead and start us off? What are your feelings or your reflections, on what we watched?
Yeah, no, thank you. Danse, Larissa Crawford Dishne, Caution. Bonjour, je m'appelle Larissa Crawford. Hey, Larissa Crawford from what is currently Canada. It's been interesting. I've been reflecting on this short video, and I really dove into the full length video. And so I'm going to speak to not only what we just saw, but I'm going to speak to especially the conversation that happened in what does it mean to be a citizen of the Commonwealth, critical conversations from 2021. So I thought it was a really interesting exchange that I witnessed between Justice Kirby especially and Darian Noreen. Because on one hand, we see the optimistic view of the charter values and how we see, and how he references religion, law, societal values as being shared across the Commonwealth. And what I really appreciated about what Darian had done in this conversation is that he named that this is one worldview, this is one truth when it comes to relating to the Commonwealth. And Darian even says what the Commonwealth has in common across the states is colonization. And he names this colonizer kind of perspective of the values in the charter and of the usefulness of the charter. And so I really appreciated how he did this. And it was really interesting in the conversation because what we saw was a deflection from acknowledging that truth or those harms. We saw, I am the people. I have Black friends, essentially. We saw this deflection where I have seen progress, but from arguably an ivory tower, literally and figuratively. And so when I see this happen, it really illuminates to me our discomfort with acknowledging that the colonial project, as we talk about it in history, is an ongoing project. And to deny that reality that so many of us have to navigate today, especially in what is currently Canada, where the violent part of colonialism is still very much our daily experience. State-sanctioned violence is still our daily experience. I really struggle, and my peoples really struggle to look at the language of the charter and to see value when there's not an acknowledgement and there's not a willingness to acknowledge the ongoing violence that we see taking place. And that's what I found Darian really did well, is illuminating that, asking those questions. And if we go back to kind of his contributions throughout that conversation, the charter needs to reflect and be accessible to colonized people. There needs to be an acknowledgement of that. And so when we look at the charter values, I'm hesitant to talk about the application of the charter values, because if we aren't critically asking where these charter values are coming from and why we feel we need to impose these values onto the states, rather than taking a closer look into how we can reconfigure and reconstitute the charter to better reflect these colonized states. Again, I'm using that as a contemporary verb. I'm using that as a contemporary colonizing. It's a colonizing project. If we aren't asking these questions, then these values are going to continue to fail so many people. I came to this conversation having to do quite a bit of research, and I can't bring this charter to my communities. I can't. They would see this and I would lose so much trust and credibility in these communities because it continues to fail to acknowledge our realities and the harm that's been caused and the fact that we're pursuing these charter values, navigating these realities. So in short, when I think of like the questions that this clip and that these conversations really brought to me and that I'm really thinking about before I'm thinking about the charter values is how do reparations fit into the charter? And what about rotations in the Commonwealth, in leadership? What does that look like? And that Darian brought that up. When we even look at William Shockey in another critical conversation, the restitution for obligation to the Commonwealth with penalties when failing to do so. And COP definitely illuminates the need for more concrete action that the charter embolds. And then finally, this conversation is about youth. But what happens when youth are being targeted by our Commonwealth governments? What happens when what youth are saying is not in alignment with our colonial states?
Right,
and the charter does not hold space to rectify that yet. And so that's kind of my considerations of these critical conversations. And I'm really thankful for the people you've brought in to these conversations, because again, people like Darian, I hold a lot of hope for people continuing to ask these questions and acknowledging the living legacies that we're navigating today, and how we can shape those for future generations.
Yes, and that's why these conversations are necessary, right? And definitely why we need to make sure they're as diverse as possible and that we're bringing as many young people in as possible, because those perspectives are necessary. You spoke about acknowledgement and you spoke about, where the values are coming up from and going back to the beginning. So and I want to pose this one to Christine, and if anyone else wants to kind of chime in, how do we, the people, move the charter from being a set of aspirations to becoming a practical instrument of challenge and of change, something that comes alive?
Thank you so much. And I just want to say I resonate strongly with Larissa's point, and I acknowledge it. And I'm so grateful for your viewpoints. Understanding, I think it's really important for us in the Caribbean to understand the trauma that colonization has left us. As a young person in Guyana tasked with mobilizing people to care about the climate crisis and the gender crisis, for me, my work, that's not my work only. I have to create spaces for healing the racial tensions that has been birthed because of colonizations. My ancestors traveled in ships. They were taken in ships to Guyana to farm the land, to work the land for Europeans to benefit. But now we are at the forefront of the climate crisis. I think when we think of the charter, we have to think of accountability and a benchmark to measure that progress, because it has been 10 years and what have we accomplished? I think creating accessible finance, especially for grassroots organization, people on the ground who are actually doing this work, is really necessary. Having a charter is one aspect of the work, but the reality that people are facing, the effects of climate change, gender equality, it all amplifies when we think of the global pandemic that we're still going through. We also want the charter and the Commonwealth to struggle with those on the front line. For example, what does development actually looks like? What does it mean for oil and gas development in Guyana, widespread bauxite mining in Jamaica, deep sea mining in our water? What does development actually mean? And then we have to look at these issues through an intersecting and an intersectional lens, because these issues are not single justice issue. How does it affect the most vulnerable who are deeply affected by the inequality?
Harry, what do you have to say?
Sure. Yeah, I think I really resonate and really sympathize with, again, that gap that I talked about between where the charter is, or the sort of outside, and then where the actual communities are. I think one of the things I wanted to say is in turning this document into something which is real, I worry that, I worry about where we spend our energy. And the reason I say that is because ultimately it took, the Commonwealth has been in existence for, coming up to, I think it's coming up to 70 years now. And so if we are going back, I worry that we spend our energy on parts of it which are deeply controversial, and like the reality is reparations, things like that, are super controversial and also not agreed amongst all the Commonwealth states. And so I wonder whether we spend 10 years pouring energy into, okay, great, how do we get these right, or we use, again, this is just a question, or we use this established sort of thing, this established charter which everyone has signed up to, and being on the front line of getting countries to sign up to one document, it is ridiculously difficult. And so we've got this charter. I guess and for me, it goes to, okay, great, how do we use this completely imperfect document? And I definitely don't think it's perfect at all, but this completely imperfect document to actually have an impact on the lives of people today. And I think the way we do that is capacity building. The way we do that is, again, some of the awareness, but really using it as a way to sort of go, hey, this is how you hold these governments to account. And then, because the reality of it is, it's not going to have any teeth. I don't think there's any appetite for it to become legally binding. And so for me, it's the way that you do that is you put the power back in. You put the power back into the people and say, this is how you use this as a living and active document to change some of those societies.
So coming up with some practical way forwards. Riddhi, what did you want to add?
It's interesting that Harry just mentioned that they don't think that there's a appetite for this to become legally binding, because I would feel that probably that is sort of the way forward, and that is what a lot of people have been saying that we have heard from so far also, right? Like, we've been talking about making tangible changes, we've been talking about penalties, we've been talking about restitution. Christine mentioned, what does development mean? So just speaking from a disability perspective, I'm interested in seeing how maybe the charter could be used to enact a law or for implementation in my country. So for instance, in India, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was used to push forward the Mental Health Care Act in 2017, which is now like a landmark law that is used. So, I mean, that's what I'm curious about.
Riddhi, that's a good example that you used. I mean, what do you think the role of the young people across the Commonwealth should be playing in order to get these governments to uphold and protect the Charter values, to enact some of these laws, to use this as inspiration?
Well, I think when we talk about young people, it's also really important to talk about which young people, right? So if as Larissa mentioned, it's very, very important to be contextual. So if we talk about like human rights, democracy, or like good governance, like what does that mean, and who are the young people who are talking about it? So in India, I would say we need to have people at the forefront who are from scheduled caste communities, who are from scheduled tribes. So what we say Adivasi communities, who are actually the people who are extremely, extremely impacted by climate change, who are dispossessed of their land, who have been living on lands that are then mined for, say, coal, to power the rest of the country. So these are the people who need to be able to make their voices heard. And it has to kind of be a way that is not trickle down. Trickle down doesn't work. I think we all know that by now. It's been established. It has to be something that is ground up. And I'm really interested in tangibly what that capacity building looks like. How are we going to address the fact that because of caste, year after year after year, students in India are dying at colleges, how are we going to address the lack of representation of marginalized communities? How are we going to talk about Islamophobia?
Right.
There's so much.
Things that people are facing today. Yes.
Yeah.
Deanna, I would like to hear from you. We haven't heard from you yet. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I've been taking in everybody's comments and feedback, and especially relating back to the video. I think coming from the perspective of being of Jamaican descent, but being born and raised in the UK and educated here, I think it's very clear to me, similarly to Harry, I did not know about this charter until maybe a few months ago when I did an episode for the podcast that I do about the Commonwealth in the wake of Queen Elizabeth II's death, and thinking about then, as a new monarch comes in, what will be kind of the future for the Commonwealth. And I think, and maybe I'm biased as a historian, my head is always in the past, but I don't think we can at all in this country, in the UK, move forward and think about this charter and think about young people kind of being empowered and inspired by the charter without them understanding the role of empire, the British Empire in the past, especially in this country. In Britain, they need to hold a mirror up to themselves through the education system, through what is taught in schools to young people. We do not get taught about empire, barely. We barely get taught about the slave trade. And when we do, we focus on America because it's easier to look at another country's wrongs than our own. And I feel like unless that's truthfully done in this country, the Commonwealth, for most people here, I'm from Birmingham, we had the Commonwealth Games last year. You say the Commonwealth in Birmingham, people think of the sports games. There's so much more to the Commonwealth, important issues like this charter that are overlooked because of the fact that the history and the way that we're educated here are not done correctly, in my opinion.
I want to hear from Allan. We haven't heard from you in a while. We have two answers? Okay, Larissa. You can go first and then we can go into our next point.
Yeah, Deanna, what you do is so important. And I think it really is aligned with this idea of ancestral accountability. My understanding of it is the better we understand our ancestors and our group ancestors, our collective ancestors, their actions and inactions, and how it shaped our realities today that we've inherited, we're better situated to acknowledge our roles through time and space in shaping the realities that future generations will inherit. We see these teachings in Indigenous worldviews around the world. And so this idea of looking to the past to understanding, again, the living legacies. I carry a slave master named Crawford. I'm very much a part of the living legacies of the transatlantic slave trade, living that out today. And acknowledging harm is one of the first places where we can find those seeds for restorative pathways forward. And so throughout the conversations that I'm seeing about the Commonwealth role and the Charter role, this is something, and going to Deanna's kind of focus of looking to the history, I think that this really is a gap in terms of at least how I'm able to access the Commonwealth and how my communities are able to access the value that the Commonwealth brings. There's a gap here. And so I just wanted to appraise definitely Deanna's points.
Right, you feel that's been neglected. So, I mean, how, the next question that I have here is what role could or should the Charter play in how the Commonwealth sees and projects itself? And we've heard a few times already in this conversation, we talk about acknowledgement and accountability. How can that be included? How can we practically hold these, these institutions to account? Maybe Allan or Christine or Deanna, I don't know if you want to take this one in. I'm going to let anyone who feels it on their heart or on their spirit, I want you to take this one.
I wanted to touch earlier on that discussion earlier about youths but getting to the Charter, I mean, that passed. But I think in terms of ourselves, our own institutions and processes, I think we have to be realistic, right? And honest with ourselves. Yes, the Charter frames the Commonwealth commitments, and yes, it outlines values. However, like Harry mentioned earlier, in respect to achieving our goals, how can we make it measurable, right? These are the things that should be reflected in our strategic plans when we meet as a group. We need to explore options of setting up alternative structures as a check and balance system. Everybody that spoke so far speaks on the accountability aspect, but who do we select to keep governments accountable, right? Is it us young people? And kind of what I wanted to touch on earlier is about the organization of young people, right? We keep hearing, and if you go to any one of these Commonwealth events, you keep hearing the demographic of 1.6 billion youths in the Commonwealth, or 60% of people in the Commonwealth being youth, but are we organizing ourselves? Are we seeing ourselves as an important part of the framework of the structure of the Commonwealth? And how are we organizing ourselves to ensure that, we can influence that power? For some of the things that you were talking about, Deanna or Ms. Crawford, how are we organizing ourselves to influence that change? To kind of get the platform, like a legitimate platform, so that we are recognized, right? So these are some of the things that we have to think about. Being measurable. How are we asking governments to publish their progress, or are they giving us key performance indicators as to how they're achieving some of the goals set out within the charter? We don't want the charter to be a mission statement. We want it to be a vision statement. We want to know where are we going and how we're going to get there. And I think that's very important going forward.
Right. Thank you, Harry. Allan, sorry. Harry, we're going to go to you, and then maybe one more quick insight before we have to move on to our Q&A. So I'll ask you to be quite concise here, Harry.
No worries. I'll be super concise, really practical. What we could do is the name and shame method. It works with corruption. It works in other instances where essentially you have a league table that says this is the current benchmark of where everyone is, and against the charter, this is how this is essentially where they'll be going. And the idea is that then sort of compares different states to be able to do that. Maybe that's an approach. It's just something I'm thinking about, sort of something I thought about when I was preparing for this, which is how do we get more movement in the right direction in this instance? Obviously, the Millennium Development Goals were one way, the SDGs are another way, and those are really great frameworks which have actually helped move us along. And so they're not perfect, I know they're not, but what I'm saying is, how do we make what is an imperfect document, how do we actually make sure that they do it?
Right. Okay. We are going to move into section 3 now, and maybe we'll have some insights from the audience on some ways that we can do that, and maybe even from some of our other panelists. I'd like to hear from, for instance, Christine on maybe what she had to say to that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and move into our Q&A. So, audience, we'd like to hear from you. We want to get the dialogue going between you and our main speakers. So we had prompted you before, and since then the team has been gathering your comments, and we encourage you to keep them coming by, of course, using the raise hand function to make your contribution. We'll be taking comments and questions in groups of 3. So I've been getting some comments and questions sent to me on the side from the team behind. So I just want anyone who's on the panel, if you have something that you want to say to any of these comments or any of the questions that I'm going to read out, I'd love for you to just go ahead and use the raise hand function for me there. All right. So the first one is coming in from Shashi, and it says, in coming next year, we want Commonwealth to be more powerful, more representative, more responsive in building a strong, healthy relationship between the countries and ensuring transparency and establishing the real democracy of voice and freedom. We have another one here. Lillian Walker said, indeed, there is a gap. Awareness is key, and to make the information realistic and attainable. Perhaps awareness can be initiated through partnerships and collaboration with youth programs. And finally, we have another comment here from Abinaya B. It says equality and education. This could be through channeling the existing initiatives by different organizations across the world and adding them into the core principles of the Charter. The promotion can be done through social media and a creative dissemination of the information. So I don't know if anyone has a comment that they want to make here, but it does seem like there is some push for maybe integrating existing youth organizations already. This is a perfect place for Christine to come in. Christine, what did you have to say here?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. And I definitely agree, we can't operate in silos. And also one of the things I really want to acknowledge is the burden that is placed on the youth. That burden is a heavy load, It is expected that we fix all of society's problems despite not causing them. And we are expected to fix these problems even though those in power refuse to listen to us. And oftentimes, like we said, we're being tokenized. So we should always be at the table where decisions are being made, especially about our well-being. And, you know, I had a hard time deciding if I wanted to be a part of this panel, because I don't want to be in a panel that discusses youth as it relates to the Commonwealth. I want to be on a panel whereby inclusive voices are encouraged, whereby marginalized and persons who have been silenced are speaking out, and where decisions are being made. I don't want to just speak with my fellow young people about their ideas because they're already doing the hard work. I want to be in spaces where I can make decisions, where we can see, you know, the things that we want. We're seeing that we're investing in those on the ground who are actually doing the work.
Right. We do have some other comments here that we want to get through. This time we're going to hear from the people themselves. Okay, so I have Salma Amiri here. If we can go ahead and unmute her, she's going to make her comments.
Okay, I am so humbled to be here with you and represent Tanzania in this event. So I have a comment on what all the panels have been saying.
Yes, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, I would like to talk on promoting a greater awareness of the Commonwealth Charter. It requires a multifaceted approach that involves education. Introducing the Commonwealth Charter in schools, colleges, and university will be an effective way to raise awareness among the younger generation. Also, public campaigns can be done, such as social media campaigns, public events, and seminars. Also, community engagement, like local outreach events, workshops, and cultural exchanges can help to engage people at the grassroots level. And the other one is partner with civil society organizations. And the last one is to translate the charter as the Commonwealth is composed of diverse cultures and languages. Translating the charter into different languages can help it to make it more accessible to all member states. So this could include producing audio and visual translations as well as written translations. So it requires a multifaceted approach that involves education, public campaigns, community engagement, partnerships with civil society organizations, and translation. And also by working together, the member states can raise awareness of the Charter and its values and principles, thereby promoting greater understanding, tolerance, and respect within the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Salma. Thank you. We're going to take groups of 3. So just asking our panelists to keep that in mind if you had a comment to add to that. There's another one here from Harriet Shandy. So I'm going to ask that she be unmuted and go ahead and give her insights here. Harriet, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
So thank you so much for this opportunity. Basically, I agree with what my fellow has said. And just to add on top of that, I would really request that even before us having such a conversation at this level, how about we go to the grassroots? How about having the same conversation with those people who are very much affected with these issues? Because we may be speaking and talking even to those people who are up there, but the real people who are affected with the issues are not really assisted. They're not really being helped. So kindly, if we can have such conversations narrowed down, beginning from the grassroots, beginning from the bottom all the way to the top, then it can very much be effective. Then I'm requesting if perhaps the Commonwealth, if they can consider removing families in the streets for its member states. We're having so many people in the streets. Also, we're having member states we're having people with mental issues. If they can assist countries deal with their members who are faced with mental issues, especially those in the police forces and stuff, it will be very much, I would really appreciate. Then measures to help curb food security issues, especially in Kenya right now. We're having so many people die of drought and drought, hunger,
Right.
people who don't have water and such issues.
Yes.
And basically financial security and employment, especially amongst the youth. And we have those ideas. The youth have the ideas already.
Yes. So we need to make sure that everyone's involved in these kind of decision making and the ways forward, to make sure that we go right down to everyone and everyone's voice being heard. Thank you, Harriet, for that. I do see that we have some hands raised. Let's go ahead and start with Riddhi, go to Larissa, and then to Deanna, and then we'll go on to our next set of 3 comments. And I'll ask that we, we make sure that we keep it brief so that some more people can have their voices heard. Thank you so much. Riddhi, I was waiting to hear from you. From the moment she started speaking, I was like, oh, I'm gonna call Riddhi next.
I'm just thinking, to keep it brief, I'll just raise some questions. So we agree that, the root of the Commonwealth is evil. It's colonialism, and it's an ongoing project. So when I think about that, I also think about things like passport equity, who can travel easily. I think about vaccine inequity and the many, many people who died. So I'm thinking, and I'm listening to what all our panelists are saying. So my question is, how do we then use this charter as something that we can instead, how do we use it towards enshrining like values that we can all aspire towards? Like, what if the Commonwealth meant something different? What if it meant trans rights for everyone who is bound to the charter? What if it meant that the 23 countries who are responsible for half of all historical emissions, those who are bound by the charter, those of them who are bound by the charter, at least, are held to the amount of climate financing that they should be doing? What if it means that Pakistan, which was flooded last year, gets the amount of aid that it needs, because it's not responsible for most of the emissions that have caused and will continue to cause displacement and climate disaster? So that's just something I'm thinking about.
Right. It's the hard questions that's going to move us forward. Larissa, what did you have in mind?
Yeah, I'm just, all these thoughts are percolating around like the tangible ways that we can make this charter more useful. And just in listening to the participants, thank you so much for sharing. You bring so much value to this space. It's making me think, and especially going back to kind of Harry's comments on accountability and measurability, and I believe Allan referred to this as well. When I think of accountability, I think of like the source that so many Indigenous nations could play a part in. At least in what is currently Canada, we have Indigenous nations that have put through self-governance structures and are self-governing nations. Nations entered treaties with Canada, therefore acknowledging our nations as sovereign nations. And I don't see too much of that reflected in terms of the structural accountability and measurability of the effectiveness of not only the Commonwealth Foundation, but then also the Charter. So that's a source of accountability that I would love to see explored, and that I think could really address a lot of the concerns that we're hearing from participants. And then furthermore, what about Earth as a stakeholder and source of accountability? We see this happening around the world. The rights of nature, most notably in many Commonwealth states. So how can we also look to Earth as a stakeholder and as a source of accountability for the Charter when we look at Principle 10, protecting the environment? It's already aligned with how the Charter exists. So when we look at applicability and measurability, how is that being considered? And bringing Indigenous peoples on as a source of accountability is one way that we can start shifting a worldview where that is recognized as true, where Earth is recognized as a stakeholder. So thank you again to everyone who's been sharing from the audience.
Thank you, Larissa. Deanna, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of talk and speak to the point of grassroots organizing and the fact that this charter for a lot of countries and member states within the Commonwealth, the question is, how do we get the charter out there? You know, how do we get people to get on board with it? I think the best way for people to get on board with anything is to see the positive change that it's making. Without people seeing the positive change of something like this Commonwealth Charter, it's very difficult for them to sign up to these list of ideals and things that are put out. And I think the best way to get people to see that change is to empower the organizations, the grassroots groups that are already doing this work across the whole of the Commonwealth member states. There are so many organizations that are working to each of those points on the Commonwealth Charter in different ways. If the Commonwealth can successfully get behind that, and empower those groups to do that work, it will be very easy for people to get on board with that, because they'll be seeing a positive change in their local area, in their country, or in the field that they're interested in.
Right. Back to back to some of what our first commenters were saying about trying to integrate those people that are already doing that work, officially recognizing them, maybe even supporting them, giving them some help there. Thank you for your insights. And okay, so Allan, I'll ask you to be very, very short, because we do have our next set of commenters ready to go. You're muted though. You have to turn your mic back on.
Oh, apologies. I just really wanted to commend Deanna for what she said about, how do we raise awareness? We have to get people on board by showing them the positive outcomes. And I think that really sends a bit of optimism into the conversation surrounding the entire Commonwealth and the Charter. And it's very important, right? While we want to kind of reflect on what all bad has happened, we still want to look to the future as youths and to see how we shape our society that we will live in, the world and the space that we will occupy. And I think a lot of that is being practical with some of the projects that we take on. For example, in the CYSU, the Commonwealth Youth for Sustainable Urbanization, for which I'm a part of, we are looking at missions, our first mission into Belize, to look at informal settlements, to see how we could have these informal areas and how we could have people relocated and use these areas for nature conservancy, and just trying to see how we could alleviate that problem from happening in the future, because we know immigration is an issue, and there's human rights elements, and a lot of the problems that we have in our countries are multi-sectorial problems, but we have to approach it with a common interest. And I think that thing that binds us together, that common interest, has to be the Charter at some point. So coming up with practical ways in which we can implement some of these values is super important, Dan, and I'm glad you touched on that.
Yes, absolutely. Let's go ahead and hear from our next three commenters from the audience. First up, we have Judith. Judith has her hand up. We'd love to hear from you.
Good evening from Nigeria. Thank you for the opportunity. Okay.
Good evening.
The lady from Tanzania actually said what I wanted to say, but I would like to add, in terms of grassroots, we need to engage more volunteers. We need more people on board to actually go into the field. We need people who can reach out to the rural communities. For instance, in Nigeria, we have so many rural communities who, I believe, from my experience in carrying out community development projects, they're not aware of even the National Action Plan in Nigeria. Talk more of Commonwealth Charter. So we need more ambassadors, more volunteers who are enlightened and are aware of the Commonwealth Charter, to reach out to these persons, to educate them, if possible, have translators to educate them in their local languages on what Commonwealth is about, what the Commonwealth Charter is about, how it affects them as citizens of Nigeria or as citizens of a member state of the Commonwealth. So with that, it will go a long way in tackling the issue of lack of knowledge.
Thank you, Judith.
So thank you so much. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and move on to our next commenter, Emmanuel Kakuza. You can go ahead and unmute. She's absolutely right about that one. We definitely want to engage as many people as possible. The people that have maybe never even heard the word Commonwealth, but are obviously affected by a lot of what's going on in the world. What are their real issues? What are the things that they're really facing? Sometimes we tend to think that we know and we really don't. If Emmanuel's not ready yet, we can go to, we have another person with a hand up, Rina Olier. I hope I said that properly. Oh, Emmanuel is unmuted. Emmanuel, are you here? The suspense. We can't wait to hear your comments. If in the meantime, as we wait for Emmanuel to join us, anyone wants to comment on what Judith had to say, you're welcome to. I think it is something that we hadn't necessarily gotten to. Really did touch on it, but you know, the real issues facing people, what we would call upcountry or in the village, or people who aren't online, let's say, the people who don't have, you know, access to seeing what the news is every day, or they're not on Twitter and they're not concerned about the same things perhaps that we're concerned about. They're thinking about what's in front of their face every day. I think hearing more from them would definitely be beneficial. Larissa.
Yeah, I think through my work with like in international development spaces and humanitarian spaces, there's often this kind of attitude, especially from people from and based in Western countries, of we're going to come in, we know everything, we're going to impose this onto you, come learn from us. And very rarely do we see these kinds of organizations actually go in with this in the spirit of reciprocal learning. And so I think that's very much a social and ideological kind of reality that we need to confront when thinking about this charter. And instead of going, this is what you need to understand, this is what you need to do, holding space for more reciprocal learning and understanding how is this charter useful to you and how is it not? And then allowing that to rise up to those who have the power to change it, to embolden it, to promote it in the ways that are being directly kind of directed by directed by the grassroots organizations and communities.
Right. And I think that's why it's what Judith said was also important about involving local volunteers. These are the people that are, their families are in the village. Their families are the ones who are, you know, affected. They are the ones that are going to bring these things to the organizations. Let's go ahead and hear from Harry. And then I do believe that Rina is ready to speak. So Harry, just after you, we're back to Rina and we'll hear back from our audience. Harry.
Yeah, I think it's great. Being able to, I think that's so true. And I think, you know, that's what's important about the accessibility, is actually being able to, you know, get those insights from the grassroots. And I do think genuinely trying to make sure that we are, you know, we're working with existing systems and existing organizations is important. I'll give an anecdote in the sense of I sit on the board of a development organization which focuses on essentially utilizing the church network to reach really sort of, you know, remote and dissident places across the world. So it's in 50 countries. And the way that we work essentially is we're sort of we essentially are able to, you know, get funds from many different places in the West and essentially hand it over to the church and say, you know, do what needs best. Because I completely agree with Larissa, unfortunately, and, you know, I think the charter is at risk of doing this, that there is, you know, because we're sitting in the West and because we've got all these institutions and we feel like our democracies are better, we often end up saying, well, actually, you know, this is what you should do. And we come from a high society place. And I think generally what we need to do is empower those local institutions to be able to actually realize the change that they want to see, not necessarily what looks good on an Excel spreadsheet in London. Actually, it's like, no, you know, how can I best use this particular resource to help my community and help it better? And one way to do it is a local church. And so, yeah, just wanted to say that.
Okay, we do have some more commenters here. I'd like to ask Marianne to go ahead and unmute if you're ready to speak. Marianne, and as you're unmuting yourself, I'll very quickly read out what Emmanuel wanted to say. We couldn't get his voice, but he said the Charter should be very clear on addressing climate change. It should be translated in languages that citizens in member states can easily understand and easily adopt the messages therein. Absolutely, we agree. And Marianne, are you there? Are you ready to have your beautiful voice heard? We think that you're ready. And if you are not yet ready, we could go also to Otieno Livingstone, who's also raising their hand. So I think as Marianne is coming, let's go ahead and hear from Deanna. Harry, if you no longer have a comment, you can just take your hand raise. Yes, there we go. Deanna, what did you, wait, is this Deanna? Yes, okay.
Hi, sorry. I just wanted to speak to the question just asked. I forgot the name of the person that asked it, but in conversation about it being accessible with people speaking different languages. I think this is kind of why I want to stress the importance of the history of the Commonwealth and of colonization. One of the reasons why the states that formed it came together was because they had this mutual speaking of English that was pushed through the world through colonization. So many countries in the world essentially should not speak English, but they do because of the past. And I think unless you go back to that, you can't then change things and have the Charter be more accessible in those languages that people are speaking all over the country, all over the world, sorry. And rightly so, as they kind of managed to claw back some of their culture and tradition and identity from European colonization.
Christine?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge Emmanuel's comment about the climate crisis. And I think we need to have like an addendum or an addition to that document, the charter that we have, because when we talk about climate change, it's the great equalizer. When we talk about social justice, we have to talk about climate change. All the issues that we face, all the injustices that we face, colonization, capitalism, they all tie back to how we're going to address the climate crisis. And as we see right now, that those that are most vulnerable, those that has the least impact in causing this issue, they are at the forefront of dealing with this. And so we definitely need to bring those people at the table when we're making decisions. We need to invest in them. There is loss and damage. There is reparation. We have to invest in those on the ground that are most vulnerable and also who are also doing the work. Indigenous knowledge, we have to respect people and the knowledge they bring, not going into communities and saying that we know best, acknowledging people, valuing people for the knowledge that they hold.
Absolutely. We do want to hear your voices to the people in the audience. I think what may be happening is that they're raising their hand and then maybe getting a bit distracted. So when the time comes for them to unmute, they're not ready. So we're going to move on to the next person that has their hand raised. Divine, if you are here and you're ready to have your voice heard, we'd love to hear from you. Your hand is raised and all you have to do is unmute yourself and we can have your comment during this section. We really want to make this as interactive as possible. So Divine, if you're there and you can hear me, unmute yourself, reveal yourself. We would love to hear from you. And Divine, if you are not yet ready, there's also David Rupa, who has his hand up. Whoever unmutes themselves first will have their voice heard. In the meantime, Larissa.
It's really a question that I would love to hear answered kind of in the closing for Commonwealth Foundation, is how are the insights from this conversation and from the chat being validated? So will this come out in a report or will this be kind of shared via social media? I'm just, because there's a lot of really amazing recommendations and insights being collected. And I would just like to understand how that data is going to be validated moving forward.
David is ready to speak. And he's unmuted. David, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm David from Papua New Guinea in the Pacific region. I'd like to contribute in terms of young people's participation. I think the reason why a lot of people are emphasizing more on why there is a need for grassroots level participation and also education about the Commonwealth Charter. But I'd also like to educate everyone maybe who doesn't know how the Commonwealth heads of government processes also work, and the role of the Commonwealth Secretariat that coordinates the work of the Commonwealth as a whole to deliver on the Charter. So there are entry points in which we can actually educate our people at grassroots level. There are national youth councils that affiliate to the Commonwealth Youth Council, and there are other youth networks which you can join, such as the Commonwealth Human Rights Network, Commonwealth Gender and Equality Network, and Commonwealth Students Association. So these are the entry points or platforms that you can actually connect to, and there are materials and resources that you can be provided with in order for you to translate that in your own local language or context is very important as well. And that would make it faster and easier for people to know. And also, some of these bigger issues that we've been talking about have already been raised at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which other parallel forums have been held, such as the Civil Society, the People's Forum, the Women's Forum, the Business Forum, and the executive meetings. And also we have the Commonwealth Youth Forum. So utilize these spaces, but I think a recommendation to the Commonwealth Secretariat is that there needs to be a capacity building for each region. Like what the United Nations has, it has regional offices around the globe, and therefore they are visible. People know what the United Nations and the Human Rights Declaration is. So the suggestion to the Commonwealth Secretary or Commonwealth would be to open the Pacific region, a capacity office, the Caribbean, Africa and Europe, as well as Asia, so that there is visibility of the Commonwealth and also there's proper coordination at regional level, because just looking at the comments from our young people, not many of them are familiar with the Commonwealth and the processes, the policy processes and the conversations that are driven at the top level. So that's the contribution that I wanted to give.
Thank you, David.
Contribute to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Regional offices to make sure that these things are followed up on. You're absolutely right. A lot of these things were mentioned during the heads of government meeting, and it goes back to what Larissa was saying. What's next? How is all of this going to be used? What are the steps in this? So thank you for that contribution, David. Last one, and please be very brief. Is coming from Niba Fonto. Niba, we'd love to hear from you if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to state that the Commonwealth Charter has been drafted, like many other international instruments, in very general terms. And most often, the diction does not reflect the reality in most communities. And if we have to even start translating most of these general terms, it may not reflect what the local people experience daily. For example, the pygmies in the Congo Basin, sustainable development and protecting the environment is a lifestyle and not an institutional objective. I think we can learn more from the pygmies on how to protect our environment rather than trying to teach them, because they have succeeded to do that for a very long time. Secondly, the Commonwealth institutions remain very silent on political issues. I am English speaking from Cameroon, and we've had a crisis for close to 5 years now. I don't remember the Commonwealth hitting his hand on the table to say this should stop, or, I mean, the youth struggle to fight certain battles, and we feel we are English speaking, but a minority. And we don't see how the Commonwealth contributes in giving us that political power to affirm ourselves in the governance of the country. So I am proposing that an additional document be drafted to clearly explain what the Commonwealth Charter understands by human rights, protection of the environment, because different communities understand these things differently. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Niba. Thank you. And that's a great point that you brought up. But that is our time. So I do want to go ahead and move on to our parting shots from our panels, but you've given us a lot to think about. So let's go ahead and close out our Q&A section for this session anyway, because there are more conversations to come in the coming days. But for now, I want to get our panelists parting shots before we wrap up. So Allan, Harry, Christine, Larissa, Deanna, and Riddhi, consider this as you give your parting shot. How do you want Commonwealth institutions to use the Charter in the coming decade? What impact in a perfect world, in the dream world, would you want the Charter to have? I'll start with Larissa, since she has the biggest smile, and I want everyone to go ahead and make sure that their parting shots are quite concise.
I hope to see the Charter support those who are truly acting in alignment with the Charter values, but in misalignment, again, with colonial state interests, because capitalistic and natural resource extraction principles and motivations are not in direct alignment with the Charter value. So if we look at young people around the world, we are acting in alignment with Charter value. And I want to see more tangible and loud support for those people within Commonwealth nations.
Thank you, Larissa. Let's go ahead and move on to Allan. You're still muted.
I keep forgetting. I believe it would be great to see the Commonwealth institution use the Charter to advocate for the causes in their respective areas, right? A lot of these groups and institutions already have the ideas, but they are significantly underfunded. So going back to the groups and leveraging the Charter and saying, listen, you want us to get this done. It says in your Charter that you want to have, you want to address climate change, but we need to do this, but we don't have the funds for it. So using the Charter as some measure of leverage to the larger group, to the larger Commonwealth. And I think that would be a great step for us to raise awareness and gain attention, right? Because I know the impact of using the Charter in this ways could be significant, right? And it's not only in climate change and what we talk about in sustainable development, but basic human rights, the rule of law, greater democracy. These are the areas that we have to ensure that we're doing our part in. And this is the way all groups must look at the Charter going forward, not just as the document, but a leveraging point for them to accomplish what they need to get done.
Thank you, Allan. Harry, let's go ahead and hear from you.
Just closing remarks. I really hope that we put a right energy into what we focus on the Charter, and not focus endless amounts of time on if it says this or if it says this. I agree it should be translated, but what I would really like is for us to create sort of measurable outputs related to the Charter, and then a public way which the everyday citizen is able to see, to sort of recognize where that gap is, and a way for them to hold local, very local, so down to
right.
the chiefs,
yes.
Leaders accountable to the Charter. So that's really where I would like this to go to.
Thank you, Harry. Deanna, let's go ahead and hear from you for your parting shot, as brief as possible.
Sure. I think primarily I still want to see the Commonwealth hold a mirror up to itself, especially when educating people moving forwards, looking at the Charter and what it means now. I think we've still got to go back. I think there's still education to be done. I think grassroots organizations need to be empowered, not in the kind of paternalistic, self-serving ways we've seen. We don't need to see things like investments that actually just plunder countries into further debts. I think it's really important that this Charter fits the needs of not just those in some of the more developed states in the world, but those within the Commonwealth that actually need the support are able to get it, especially with the urgency of the climate crisis. I think it's so important that certain member states are prioritized in looking at the response to that.
Thank you, Deanna. Riddhi?
I think in my dream world, what I would really like to see is the charter used as a tool to kind of take into account these consistent and persistent violations of what is enshrined in the charter, and whether it's at a local body level or however it's translating, I would like to see some change when violations are happening, as this has been noted repeatedly again and again. For instance, the Commonwealth countries had signed the Living Lands Charter. So what would that mean then when, say, so to be very specific, but very brief, 2 years ago, I reported on basically a family of Adivasi brothers who were arrested on false conspiracy charges. They were arrested on false terrorism charges just when they were out hunting rabbit. And it took ages for a police report to be made, for anything to be done. And these are, again, the indigenous communities who are being dispossessed of their land. There was no due process, there was nothing. Now, 2 years later, last month, this happened again. Another family of indigenous people in the same region have been arrested. Nothing is happening. So I would just mainly like to see consistent violations by member states addressed. Yeah.
Thank you. Christine?
Thank you all so much. And I'm glad that I'm last. I can always thank you all and honor you for the work that you've been doing. What I can say is, young people, we're already doing the work, and for the Commonwealth, they have a lot of work to be done, but we're here and we're ready. And I would say in the coming decade, I would like to see the Charter work with people on the ground to form a healthy, positive relationship with women, girls, and the environment, because we know that these issues are interconnected, they're intersectional, and we definitely need inclusive voices.
Thank you, Christine. And you kind of stole some of the words out of my mouth, but that's perfect because that is the final note. Of course, there is a call to action here. Everyone, if you want to sign up to the Charter, go ahead and do that. The website has been posted in the chat. It's the way that we can have our voices heard. We need to all be active if we want these things to change. And I do want to also say a warm thank you to all of our panelists and to all of our audience contributors for their insights, and to everyone who joined the call. Thank you for your presence. These are the conversations that plant the seeds. These are the ones that push us forward. And they cause other conversations. So thank you so much for that. My name is Makeda Mahadeo, and it was my pleasure to have had this conversation with you today. But again, it won't be the last. The Commonwealth Foundation's next critical conversation will be in 2 days' time on Thursday, the 16th. This will be in person, co-hosted by the High Commission of South Africa in the UK. Also focused on the 10-year anniversary of the Charter with the theme of a decade of the Commonwealth Charter, where to now. Video highlights from today's discussion will be played at that event. So that is something we'll be having our voices heard there, and perhaps more conversation will be coming from that. Also, if you have not signed up already, go ahead and join the Foundation's digital discussion platform. It's called the People's Forum. This is an innovative online discussion space for activists, practitioners, artists, and civil society leaders to network, share ideas, and build solidarity around the issues we've discussed today. Okay, please use the link posted in the Zoom chat. Join, meet, and strategize with other fellow activists from around the Commonwealth. So this is Commonwealth Week. We would also love to have you continue the conversation on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram. You can use the at Commonwealth.org to include them in the conversation. And I just want to say, finally, thank you all. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.